From the EWTN radio and television studios, this is EWTN Theology Roundtable, a conversation with the experts of EWTN's Department of Theology. Got questions about the liturgy, scripture, or tradition? They have the answers. Now, EWTN Theology Roundtable.
EWTN Theology Roundtable on the air right now. Once a month, we gather during the open line space and spot on EWTN Radio to have a conversation about theology with the one and only head and host of EWTN Open Line and Theology Roundtable, Colin Donovan, also the head of our theology department here at EWTN. And today we are going to be talking about the topic of immigration. This is Elena Rodriguez giving you a very, very warm welcome. Our lines are open right now. You can call in and ask your questions, share your comments about the topic of immigration. Our call screener, Matt Gubinski, ready to talk to you. And let me introduce to you the rest of the panel we have here in Radio Studio 1 with us. And our theology advisors are ready to take your questions and comments as well. Noah Lett and Cindy Cuellar joining us along with Colin Donovan. Welcome and thank you very much for being here with us. And we are going to also open up our texting lines. We'll explain how that works in just a moment. So, Colin, it really is a wonderful topic to discuss. The church is so rich in social teaching and has so much to offer. And really, in not just the United States, but in many countries around the world, they are facing a huge issue with the problem of immigration, with tending to the immigrants, and also with trying to find that balance, countries and legislation, and how to tend to the immigrants without sacrificing the people who are already there. How do we respect human dignity? And that is why it's wonderful to have you here to share with us what is the Catholic social teaching regarding the issue of immigration, Colin.
Well, in a way, Elena, you use the right word. It's about balance. There are different rights, the rights of individuals, rights of nations, right of those people who are, you might say, chased out of their own land by economic or political or conditions of war or whatever they may be, to talk about to what extent they have a right to go where they want for a better life, and to what extent the people who are in a particular place have certain rights as well to guard that life and security that they have. So we're going to try to address that, and we'll see that it's not a monotone kind of issue. It really is multicolored or multi-toned because there are several important values that need to be balanced. And most of the debates which people take in a black and white fashion are debates about the policy. Now, there are sometimes stark contrasts in those debates. You might say contrast between what would appear to be an extreme approach on one view and an extreme approach on the other. Right. So what we're going to try to do today is give people an insight into the Catholic teaching so that they can judge when they're faced not just in an election, but also during the course of debates in Congress or their state legislatures or wherever it is, to deal with the issue of immigration, of the migrant, of the worker, whether documented or undocumented, and how a Catholic ought to consider that.
Our phone lines are open, 1-800-585-9396. That is our number. Again, 1-800-585-9396. If you are listening outside the United States or Canada, we have a number for you too. That is country code 1-205-271-2985. Again, our international number is country code 1, then 205-271-2985. Give us a ring and share your questions and comments.
Well, we're going to jump right to the four key principles, which have some corollaries that we will probably bring up in the course of the show. And they're taken from the Compendium of the Social Doctrine of the Church, which is issued by the Holy See in 2004. It's sort of intended to be like the Catechism of the Catholic Church to doctrine, which also contains some commentary on social issues, a more full treatment of the social teaching of the Church. And there it gives us the four permanent principles that don't need to be balanced. That may be not the quite, when you're dealing with principles, you're shooting, you want to meet the principles.
Yes.
How you balance different rights and things in a society, that's another issue. And those rights themselves come from these principles. The dignity of the human person. As Christians, Catholics, we should take that for granted, made in the image of God. Mm-hmm. Everyone, regardless of whether they're our enemy, has a dignity that, to the extent that their human nature is good, even though they may have made bad moral choices, we must respect them as human beings and accord them dignity. The other three principles are the common good, subsidiarity, and solidarity. Now, solidarity sort of goes with the issue of human dignity. If we see the dignity of every other human being in the world, then we should appreciate a need to help them with their needs. That's solidarity, how I am in solidarity with the other person. Clearly, our members of our family, the members of our local society, our national society, there are certain preferences that we can legitimately have there, but ultimately everybody's human dignity must be respected, and we should show solidarity in some respect with all other human beings made in the image and likeness of God, which is all human beings. That leaves us with the common good and subsidiarity. And I think in the immigration issue, these are two very important things, assuming we take for granted human dignity and the need to be in solidarity with people especially who are poor and oppressed in economic situations or by war or whatever. And this is the common good and subsidiarity. Yes. So Noah, tell us what exactly is the common good. Does that mean that you get a television and Cindy gets a television and Elena will give a radio since she's a radio gal?
Yes.
But is this what the common good is?
Not at all. Not at all. Common good is more fundamental than those things, because you'd like to say, well, the people 300 years ago had none of those things, so that they had no common goods. No, they had common good even back then. It's better to think about it like this. Everybody needs clean air. Everybody needs clean water. The fact that everybody needs that is for the same reason, so that they can live. You don't have that, you can't really live. And so we need to pay attention to the fact that the common good is what we all need in order to live, and not things that people couldn't have had 100 years ago or 300 years ago because they don't have them. Or
2,000 years ago, for that matter.
That's right. That's exactly right. And I want to quote the Catechism, which gives us a little more specifics about what the common good is. It's paragraph 1925. It says, the common good consists of three essential elements: respect for and promotion of the fundamental rights of the person, prosperity or the development of the spiritual and temporal goods is number 2, and peace and security of the group and its members is number 3. Now, those three things we can all see it's like topics of a list. They're not individual things necessarily. But we can all realize that if I can't have my fundamental rights, the rights of a human being, then it's the case that I would say that I don't have a common good. You can think about people in Auschwitz or some other, or a gulag or something where there's no real human living conditions.
And there's certain material goods there, but you could also speak of the spiritual goods of freedom of religion, freedom of association, freedom. These are the things that if any one person in a society is deprived of that, you could say that in some sense we're all deprived of it.
Yes, because you mentioned solidarity, a quick note on that. Solidarity is not something we create. It has been made for us. The fact that we are all human. So it's not some big thing like the UN needs to create this solidarity program and I'm going to be a part of it and I'm going to have solidarity. No, it is given to us by our existence as a human being, which requires our recognition of it. Well,
it's part of our social nature as a human being.
Yes, it's exactly so. And one can make this point that everybody who is concerned about immigration, whether rightly or wrongly, especially those who think wrongly about it, are trying to defend a way of life which they feel is giving them the common good. And they're worried that other people who don't have that way of life are going to come in and destroy the supports for the common good. Their very interest in stopping the immigrant is so that they can, quote, continue to have the common good that they enjoy. But let's move on here. The Catechism in 2241 connects these to the immigrant, and it gives this quotation: "The more prosperous nations are obliged, to the extent that they are able, to welcome the foreigner who is in search of the security and means of livelihood which he cannot find in his country of origin." There are several important things there. One, it tells us that the person's a foreigner by their choice for what? Security and the means of livelihood. And security was mentioned in number 3 of our 3 things about the common good. They are choosing to become a foreigner because they want these common goods, and that's why they're choosing to leave where they are to go somewhere else. The second thing it tells us is that the more prosperous isn't defined by being a part of the G8. It's defined by the mind of the individual who is moving from country A to country B, because in country B they have more of the common good that they don't have where they came from. So you might move from one poor country to a less poor country, or a country that has less crime to a country that the country that has more crime to a country that has less crime, because it's a matter of you being able to identify the common good that you are without. So we need to bear in mind that the common good is what we all want, and a person's willing to be a foreigner to find it. One final thing here. We can all think of ourselves as American citizens. How many of us have moved across the country for a better job? How many of us have moved out of a neighborhood where there is crime and poor schools to a place where there's less crime and better schools? Because what? We are in search of the common good, and we are willing to make a journey to find it, right? So this shows that the solidarity is already in us. It is not something we create. It is in us, and we are recognizing it. And by the fact that we have moved from Iowa to Florida or Chicago, to someplace in Birmingham, Alabama, or wherever, shows that we, like them, seek the common good. And when we get to such a place, we have the obligation to do what? To support the way of life that has brought about the common good that we see present in the place where we are.
In other words, not to destroy the way of life, the common good that is already there,
Yes.
As if my particular good, my cultural expressions or my religious expressions or whatever are so important that I could destroy the common good of others so that they may have full. That's not really the common good. That's a particular good, a good of a group.
Yes.
And so there is this necessity, thanks to Jason Addington, our TV side producer, who found this quote for us from St. Thomas Aquinas in the Summa Theologia, the first part of the second part, and in the section having to do with justice. He talks about this relationship of human, Thomas does, with foreigners. And he says that, and he cites the example of the Jews whom God told to receive the foreigner, the sojourner, and treat them well in their land. But he also said it shows that when foreigners were admitted to the society of Israel, as they could be to medieval society or to our own today, that there was always this willingness to join the fellowship of that new community on its terms. Yes. And he said, for they were not at once admitted to citizenship, just as it was law for some nations that no one be deemed a citizen except for after 2 or 3 generations. And he cites Aristotle as authority on this. And he goes on, the reason for this was that if foreigners were allowed to meddle with the affairs of a nation, as soon as they settled down in its midst, many dangers might occur, since the foreigner, not yet having the common good firmly at heart, might attempt something harmful to the people. So the common good is a goal, but it is something to be received by the newcomer and not destroyed by the newcomer. This was the biblical example. This is the theological example from our own Catholic tradition. And it is therefore an example, a prudential example also for our modern situation today. When we come back, we want to talk about the issue of subsidiarity, because that too is important in how we welcome and the manner and the way in which we execute the welcome of the stranger within our country.
What do you think about an immigrant's right or duty to assimilate? Give us a call, 1-800-585-9396, here on EWTN Theology Roundtable. The number again, 1-800-585-9396. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to EWTN Theology Roundtable on EWTN Radio and Television.
EWTN Theology Roundtable continues today with the topic of immigration. What does the church say about immigration? What does Catholic social doctrine have to teach us? Today with us, Colin Donovan, the head of EWTN's Theology Department, along with theology advisors Noah Lett and Cindy Cuellar, are taking your questions and comments. Please call 1-800-585-9396. That number again is 1-800-585-9396. And because this is an international show dealing about international issues such as immigration, we also have another international line if you are outside the United States or Canada, you want to chime in. And that line is country code 1, then 205-271-2985. Again, our international number is country code 1, then 205-271-2985. To the phones we go. Al is listening in Columbia, Missouri. In Missouri, they're the Show Me State through Covenant Radio, listening to EWTN. And Al, what is your question for Colin Donovan, Noah Lett, and Cindy Cuellar? Go right ahead, sir, please.
Well, thanks for taking my call.
Yes.
And can you clarify, please, the difference between an immigrant, a refugee, and if the church has a distinction on the definition for people that come here legally or illegally? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Well, the difference is a common language one. Mm-hmm. An immigrant is somebody who voluntarily leaves their former country. They emigrate from wherever it is, mm-hmm. and then they come into our country. They immigrate into this or another country. A refugee is somebody who's seeking a place of refuge from some imminent trial, whether it's war. You know, we have the criminality in Central America, which has driven people. All of these are facts to be determined, of course, and most laws, most governments will do a fact assessment of the claims of that. And laws do provide for distinctions, legal immigration with certain characteristics. Refugees is usually a more generous category, I think. But in terms of people who are presently among us, in terms of the dignity that is owed to them and all of those other considerations, there is no different treatment with regard to, their dignity and treating them well. Treating them well doesn't mean necessarily you can stay in the country. You can make all other distinctions about that. But I think treating them well as a human being is certainly an obligation. I don't know.
Listen.
No, that's true. Treating them well and not exploiting and things of that sort is very, very important.
Yeah. If the caller is searching for some distinction that the person who's here legally gets treated in a way different than the person who's here legally. Of course, there are legal distinctions about how you can go about getting into the system or making yourself right if you're illegal. But as my colleague said, the right treatment of people is important whether they're legal or illegal. And that right treatment is the determination of whether your country is really pursuing the common good even for its own population. A population in a country where the government can treat a certain class of people badly as nothing should make the whole population fear. Abortion comes to mind, And we should be very aware of a government that says we can classify people. I'm thinking maybe of slavery back in before the Civil War. This is a class of people that we can treat badly because they're not like the rest of us. We already have the historical examples that show us why we should be aware of a government that classifies people and maybe they are truly illegal, but to treat them as less than human and let them be victimized.
Right, and we always have to remember, too, that, again, the idea that, we are made in the image and likeness of God. Mm-hmm. So even the criminal who you rightly and justly put in prison for the rest of his life deserves to be treated with dignity, although obviously for his behavior he is quite properly incarcerated. But within that incarceration, there must be, the obviously prisons must have punishments for crimes committed in the prison, and they do that, but that all can be done with not because you any more than you discipline your child. You're saying, well, I don't love you. No, you discipline because that's what the common good requires.
Yes.
That's what the nature of the nation or the nature of the prison system requires, that punishment, that restrictions. So again, the dignity is the foundational thing. And the difficulty here is that the capacity of every country to absorb immigrants and refugees, the capacity economically, the capacity with regard to security, are all different. The trouble that I have with the way politicians deal with this issue, and sometimes it's rhetorical and sometimes they actually mean it. You know, if a politician says, I'm going to, everybody who wants to come in can come in, you think, oh, they're being rhetorical, they're just trying to appear generous and all of that. If they really meant it, that would be grossly imprudent. On the other hand, a politician who says, well, nobody can come in, you would have to think, well, surely there are justifiable cases, and there are, and pressed, typically they would say that there are. But what legislatures or Congress needs to do, or Parliament, if it's Canada or England or somewhere else, you need to develop laws which make appropriate moral and prudential discrimination among different categories of persons, so as to preserve the common good of the nation, and insofar as the dignity of the person, every person is, to respect it. So that is an extremely difficult task. And I'm not going to sit here and say we know the answers to that. It's up to the political authorities to come up with those policies, but it's up to us to judge those policies by the first principle of morality, do good and not evil, as well as to judge them by the principles of Catholic social teaching. So, Al, that's a difficult question to see how to treat the different groups. We can distinguish among them, but practically, in devising laws in dealing with the different categories, we should start with their dignity and the common good, and then go from there. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that right after the break, and subsidiarity. Who is to do that, and how is it to be done when we allow the immigrant into our nation?
Chime in with your questions, 1-800-585-9396. That number again is 1-800-585-9396. Our international line is 1-205-271-2985. That number again is 1-205-271-2985. Theology Roundtable continues in a moment.
Welcome back to EWTN Theology Roundtable on EWTN Radio and Television.
EWTN Theology Roundtable continues today talking about the issue of immigration. What does the church say? The head of our EWTN Theology Department, Colin Donovan, is the host of our show, along with our theology advisors, Colin, joined by Noah Lett and also Cindy Cuellar, answering your questions on immigration, Catholic social teaching. What does it say about the issue of immigration? Our lines are open. We're going to begin to take your questions in just a moment. So Bernardo and Catherine, please hang on in there. And the number to call is 1-800-585-9396. That number again is 1-800-585-9396. We are also opening up our texting line. So if you have a phone and you can text us, make sure to dial 55000. Send the word EWTN. Type in EWTN and send it to 55000. Then wait for the text to come back to you. And once it comes back to you, send in your question with your name. So, Colin, one of the things to consider is what is Catholic social teaching with regards to the issue of subsidiarity?
Okay. Well, let me sort of situate it in the grand picture. We've talked about the dignity of the human person, and of course, Scripture talks about receiving the immigrant, the sojourner, the traveler, and treating them with respect and dignity. So that does it. We've talked about the common good and what the common good, these basic material and spiritual things which undergird a good life that we all share, as opposed to our particular good that, maybe we or part of our group might think is the best thing, but doesn't constitute the common good. And we've talked about solidarity, how we should have this desire to seek the good of other people, and insofar as possible to receive them in and treat them well, and all of this. And we've mentioned how the governments themselves must make laws and policies that respect all of these factors and make appropriate prudential discriminations among the different categories of immigrants, refugees, and so on. Some with criminal backgrounds, some without criminal backgrounds, or today terrorist associations, and those without terrorist associations. Those who will assimilate in a culture versus those who are radically desirous of assimilating in a culture. And we brought St. Thomas Aquinas to support the view that a country has a right to expect this integration and acceptance of the common good that they find in their new country. So finally, let's say you have this body of immigrants that you've decided to allow in, or to say legalize has been proposed for those who are already here, and you're going through the prudential process of doing it. We know constitutionally the border is the function of the federal government, but Cindy, does that leave everybody out of the picture? We get to have dictates from the top as to how to deal with immigration.
No, we have to be mindful of the principle of subsidiarity. And what this does is it holds that responsibility and authority reside at the lowest level necessary to achieve a particular end. So if we look at the Catechism number 1883, this means that a community of a higher order should not interfere in the internal life of a community of a lower order, depriving the latter of its functions. So what are some examples of subsidiarity? Well, we have municipalities that let homeowners decide whether they heat their house with electricity or heat. We also have schools that let teachers implement lesson plans to reach objectives. We have states that let school boards implement dress codes in their districts. And we have a nation that lets its states decide on the speed limit on their highways. So this is what we mean by the principle of subsidiarity. But what happens when the principle of subsidiarity is ignored and the focus tends to only be on one of the other three principles that you just mentioned, such as solidarity? Well, if we continue reading the Catechism, and if we look at the compendium of the Church's social teaching, number 187 and 1883, they give us some warnings here. And they teach that excessive intervention by the state can threaten two things: personal freedom and initiative. So, number 187 continues to expand on what this means. Direct intervention deprives society of its responsibility. That's the first thing. Then you also have the social assistance state, which leads to a loss of human energies and an inordinate increase of public agencies. And these agencies, they're more dominated, much more by bureaucratic ways of thinking than by the concern of service. And with these increase of public agencies, they're also accompanied by an enormous increase of spending. And if we continue to study the compendium, number 351, it teaches that solidarity without subsidiarity can easily degenerate into a welfare state. So we have to be very mindful of this principle of subsidiarity and the role that it plays. It can't be dictating from the top on to the bottom.
So, and in fact, this has come up in the immigration debates when, and in actually the history of the implementation of freer immigration, where the national government has basically told states and municipalities, here's a block of refugees, even moving them in independent of considerations of the common good of the region, such as the ability of health care, infrastructure, educational institutions, and so on. It's an imperial impulse, isn't it?
Right.
It's an imperial impulse to dictate to every level of government how it ought to proceed, how it ought to receive and accept the immigrant. So it's certainly true that local governments, state governments, can have unjust sense of their obligations here. But at the same time, it's also possible that national government not consider the impact on the common good of people already in a region, city, or state in making their own decisions regarding immigration. I think this is one of the factors for polarization in our political community in the United States, is an unwillingness to work in common on these things, but rather simply to dictate what the policies should be. And part of it is it's political deadlocks and so on, and that's regrettable. But I think the point is that there is nobody on the political landscape who owns Catholic teaching on the social teaching or on immigration. No party, no individual. And it's the duty of Catholics to judge and vote on this as on every other issue as a Catholic, not as a Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Green Party, whatever they may be, to judge these on the issues, to favor the policies that are in keeping with Catholic teaching and are not simply a slogan, a rhetoric, or part of the platform. Yeah. And this we're not necessarily seeing.
Bring an international perspective to these topics here. What does the Catholic Church teach on immigration here on EWTN Theology Roundtable? The number for international listeners to call in right now is 1-205-271-2985. That number again is 1-205-271-2985. We go to Bernardo, who's listening in Dallas, Texas, to EWTN through Guadalupe Radio. Bernardo, your question for Colin Donovan, Noah Lett, and Cindy Cuellar. Go right ahead, please.
Oh, well, thank you for, first of all, thank you for taking my call. Well, it's more like a comment. You know how we have some of the politics there. They want to send some of the immigrants, illegal immigrants, back home. As far as my point of view, it's if you send most of these people home, we gonna have economic crisis, because there's a lot of jobs there. People are not willing to work. America's not willing to work. Agriculture, construction, and there's other jobs there. Most common people are not going to be willing to do it. Another point is that if we legalize these illegal immigrants, we can it's good revenue for the United States. It will involve doctors, and it will involve lawyers and other people that can benefit from the revenue that the United States can charge for this for making them making them legal.
No, Bernard, those are all good points, and those are all prudential considerations that ought to be considered in any immigration policy and law, because they are integrated in our society to some measure. Yes. Now, frankly, if they're from Latin America, most of them are Catholic, so they have that in common with 60, 70 other million Americans in the United States. So they have some understanding of the nature of the culture. It's maybe a little bit more Latin than Anglo-Saxon, as at least one of us here. I guess I'm the only Irishman in the room, but in any case, that's not Anglo-Saxon anyway. But So this is an important thing to think
Right.
about and to include in your thinking.
It is some of these facts are not well known, and hopefully people that aren't aware of the things that he said will look them up and see for themselves that it's true. Sadly, there are some people for whom, after knowing these facts, it makes no difference, because they have a mindset that seems to suggest that these people have broken the law, and so they need to be treated as criminals to the nth degree. And we have to understand that the first point that we made about the common solidarity among all humans, the desire for the common good, to desire it for my children, that they can have an education, or we can be in a place where there's no crime. There are people that just can't wait for that, and sadly they come in these illegal ways. We still have to deal with the fact that the only way you're going to stop immigration in some totally perfect way is by preventing human nature from being human nature. When I in America can move 5 miles down the road and get my daughter in a school where her chances of going to college increase 80%, I'm going to move.
Yeah.
I'm going to move out of it. Overnight, I can change my daughter. And the school might say to me, but if you move away, then what about the fact that you move away because we need people like you to help make it better? And it's not going to be better immediately. It's going to be better over a long time. And by that time, my daughter's graduating and her chances for college are not very good.
Yeah.
Parents sometimes get anxious. They get hungry for their kids having the good. And we have to deal with their desire for these things and not just notice that they came across the border illegally.
Yeah, I think people tend to absolutize and maximize the requirement that they go and get a visa to come in. They absolutely should, as an ordinary course of things. But we don't know the reasons that compelled them to move to do it illegally. Some of them are merely economic. Some of them are the drug cartels and things like that. I think that deserves that be investigated. There is one of the sections of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops policy statement of, I believe it's 2013. As far as I could find, it's still the one that represents the Bishops' Conference. They talk about earned legalization. An earned legalization program would allow foreign nationals of good moral character who are living in the United States to apply to adjust their status to obtain lawful permanent residence. Nothing about citizenship. Lawful permanent residence. That seems geared to the kind of person Bernardo was talking about. The person who is a productive member of the society, who has the asterisk next to his name, undocumented or illegal. You can make those kinds of determinations that this one has a criminal record. Out you go. That this one in every respect is a person of good character and a productive member of society and can be granted permanent resident status, and then they can avail themselves of the same citizenship processes that others, but not simply given to them as if they were owed it. And this is, I think, more representative of what you hear when people make fantastical statements about that our bishops are sort of supporting the open borders, everybody come in,
which they're not.
Which they're not.
They're not.
Yeah.
They're not supporting that.
And people, I think you made a fine point when you said that no one owns the Catholic teaching that's running for offices. And that includes maybe the person should look at their local, where the person running for the school board or running for the on the council,
governor or state legislature.
Maybe there's a person there that maybe they should run because they want to do the church teaching, and they should be on their local level trying to get into on the board of the local school, or I tend to think of schools a lot, or the political representatives that make the decision with the mayor of a city or something like that.
And I think, too, when you think of local politics and you think of, well, for instance, here in Alabama, we're Catholic. We're at most 5% because of immigration. I think in recent years, 3 to 5% of the population. But the Catholic Church doesn't proclaim that these things are descended on tablets from heaven. This is not what we're saying about this. It's all reasonable teaching. only the irreasonable extremes are really out of bounds. And I think non-Catholics, both Christian and non-Christians, could be persuaded to the logic and rationale of the Catholic teaching, that this is both a just way, but a way that doesn't reward illegality on the point of how they got here. And so I think this is what the church is encouraging, and what we can encourage our non-Catholics, our Catholic friends, as well as our non-Catholic friends to agree to.
You're listening and viewing EWTN Theology Roundtable, and we are speaking about Catholic social teaching as it relates to the issue of immigration. We have Catherine listening and viewing in Iowa. Catherine, what is your question for Colin Donovan, Noah Lett, and Cindy Cuellar? Go right ahead, please.
Hello. Well, mine is actually a comment because, of course, by my accent, you can tell I am not an Iowan. I am from a little island in the Caribbean called Trinidad and Tobago.
Sure.
We traveled to Florida with my dad growing up for many years, for vacation and so on, to Disney World. But 6 years ago, I fell in love and I had to move to Iowa.
Oh, boy.
And
Culture shock.
Culture shock, yes, the winter. Oh, my God. But I've survived. But I just wanted to give people a little hope. I don't know if I am just one in how many that was very blessed. That the documents are difficult. No doubt about that. I had a priest in Iowa that helped me, and he is one that brought the nuns in from Africa and India and so on. So he had a lot of advice. Yes. But once I got through that difficult part, the filing, once I filed, in 3 months' time, I was green card in hand, I was not able to work right away in the beginning because I still had a couple of years, but I was able to volunteer and get into so many different Catholic ministries, IPF with the seminarians, and I teach CCD classes, and I'm a Eucharistic minister, and it's just been a beautiful experience for me. I don't know how many people get that blessing, but I am just thankful, and I just wanted to tell the people out there that if you do it legally, there is hope,
Yeah.
And
that's a beautiful story, an example, I think, And you've clearly received, coming here to the United States, I'll use the word a privilege. If you wanted to immigrate to Trinidad and Tobago, it would be a privilege as well. Everybody's country, everybody loves their country and believes it's a privilege to go there. So it means that you've received with generosity the generous possibility to come into the United States and do, just as immigrants to other countries also do that. Sometimes I think this idea of rights is used as a bludgeon to tell people that you can't stand in the way of something because they have this right. Let's talk about them and us having the generosity and the charity both to give where we can, not the criminal, not the drug dealer and others, but also to expect a generous acceptance and assimilation on the part of others. And I think there's nothing wrong about that. Catherine, your experience was different than, say, the experience of most 19th century Irish coming here. They burnt our churches down, the nativists. They attacked us. The Irish themselves rioted in New York because they didn't want to take part in the American Civil War. But when they did take part, they were the best fighters. Think of the New York 69th as an example of that at Gettysburg. So this is the kind of thing all immigrants have been through. I think the modern experience of immigration is so much better than the latter-day experience, and Noah's ancestors didn't even get to make that choice. They were brought here against their will. But Noah's doing pretty good, I think, after all these generations. So it can work out for everybody.
And we're happy to have all of you. All of us are here of an immigrant, one way or another, of an immigrant
Exactly.
origin. We
No
turn to-
Native Americans in the room.
No Native
right?
Americans in the room, so we
Yeah.
need to keep that in mind. And we are all passing on this earth to our final homeland in heaven. So at that time, we are all immigrants. Greg is in Jefferson City, Missouri, mid-Missouri, hitting it big today on EWTN Theology Roundtable. Greg, what is your question for Colin Donovan, Noah Lett, and Cindy Cuellar? Go right ahead.
All right. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hello there.
I think, I don't know, I have a problem with Catholic social justice. I mean, I don't know, from a perspective of someone in the United States, having been to foreign countries, the third world countries, seeing what poverty really looks like, and then coming here and seeing people that feel like they're entitled, that's, I don't know. I have trouble with that part. But then also, with the immigration, it's, I don't know, we have our laws, and those laws should be respected. If I snuck into a foreign country somewhere, I'm sure I would be treated differently than someone who has come to this country illegally. And I don't know. Okay, I've got a friend of ours. He's from Finland.
We're running out of time, Greg. We won't be
okay,
able to
all right.
answer your question.
Okay. My question, I guess, is would it be just for me if you were a landowner and you owned 1,000 acres and I moved onto your land and started a little farm down in one corner of your property? Is that, if I see that as a justification to come in to better myself in that way? I mean, that's kind of a trying to personalize this national debate here.
Yeah, well, in fact, most civil laws do precisely that if somebody is on the land not pushed off or whatever, for 7 years, I think typically it is, then you've taken to understand, given up your rights. You obviously would not be giving up your rights, or willing not to, at least in that circumstance. I think that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about discriminating between the person who is productively here and the person who is squatting only, if you will. Even the squatter can be a productive worker of the land, which might make the landowner think, oh, how can I turn this to my advantage? How can I, as the medieval landowners in Europe did, where the serfs worked their land and the landowner got a percentage of what they, or even all of what they produced. Mm-hmm. There are ways of being both just and also showing solidarity.
That's right.
I would say to this gentleman that I think he was short on time, as we are now, but that he should go talk to his Catholic priest about the church's social teaching, so he can make a distinction between the church's teaching and some idea of socialism that he has in his mind. Also, that he should think about why might he move to another country, and think about how he would want to be treated there.
Yeah, that's always a good gospel question. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And to put that on the shoe of the immigrant and the refugee and say, how ought I to treat them?
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Colin Donovan, Noah Lett, and Cindy Cuellar from our theology department here at EWTN. And we want to invite you to check out on EWTN.com this show, which will air later on this month on EWTN television. Next week, we will continue to have Colin Donovan on EWTN Radio through Open Line. Stay tuned.